calling it something with regard to dance, but really talking about life broadly, love, loss, life, and digging into the book of Job and trying to understand what it's talking about. I don't know how many of you remember, if it's going to go. Okay. Let me try this again, okay? Click. You can take care of my slides today, Alyssa. You've got responsibilities now. So go ahead to the next one. How many of you remember the show Happy Days? Most of you do. Alyssa probably doesn't. I'm not sure she's ever seen an episode of Happy Days, which is really tragic, isn't it? It was like a staple. This is the show of shows. Happy Days, the whole title gives you this sense of these are the good days, right? And it was kind of during high school for most of these, the actors. And these are the good days where you just have fun and party. And here you've got this dance deal going on where the Fonz, everybody remembers him. He was the athletic, well, no, he wasn't really athletic. He rode his motorcycle and was super cool. That's basically the bottom line. And beat up all the bad guys. Does that summarize the Fonz pretty well for us? But he could also dance. And we really want our life to be just that. A joyful dance, and that's all there is to it, that it's just happy days, right? It's all good. And we just celebrate and we rejoice and we enjoy all of what's going on in life. We want that so badly. And we sometimes try to make it seem like high school is supposed to be that time. At least Happy Days certainly did. You know, from there it's downhill. And I don't think that's a good way for us to look at life, obviously. But what's really true of life is that it's much more like what's actually going on in this picture is it's a dance marathon with enemies actually attacking us. If you see me just reach over and try to tap my iPad, that just means I want you to go to the next slide. That'll be your cue, okay? But it's more like a dance of a marathon among enemies. So this is what's going on here. You can see they're doing this. They're supposed to dance as long as you possibly can. And they're holding each other up. The band is falling asleep in the background. In the actual episode, the two couples, so the ones in the background there, make comments about Fonzie's hair or something and insult him and try to bring him down all the more. But of course, he gets back up and can finish the dance strong and finishes it well. But this is so much more of life, right? We want dance to be fun and life to be fun and happy and joyful. But it's really more like a marathon where you have to just keep dancing and dancing in spite of being weary and tired and even being attacked by others. And as we learned last week, particularly Satan bringing attack on us, right? Now, as we look to this passage and to the story, we're going to look to Job. We're going to look and see what's really going on. In chapter 6, we have this crazy statement that I love. One verse, jump to it here, chapter 6, verse 4. The Almighty has struck me with his arrows. Their poison infects my spirit. God's terrors are lined up against me. This is his summary, so I got Clint to bring me some arrows. They're pretty sweet, although I understand these are just normal heads. Is that correct? These are not broadheads, which, if you were on Facebook last night, hopefully you got a kick out of my attempt to understand what he was talking about. So these are just normal arrowheads. That's pretty sharp. You said those were rounded. Kind of. Yeah, that's still going to hurt, man. That's going to go pretty deep, I would think, and cause some damage. But the other option was to have a broadhead. So that's like a big metal thing that's going to go in and actually kill whatever you hit. Is that correct? So I thought it was fascinating as I was connecting it with this. God's thrown his arrows, struck me with his arrows. But I don't think God uses the broad head either. So it's very perfect that you didn't bring those along. Because he doesn't throw these at us to kill us. Now Satan, yeah, that's his intent, right? He wants to destroy us. But God has a different plan in mind. And so just the sharp edge, maybe even a little more rounded would have been good. But, right, is more along the lines of what God is doing in us, okay? The Almighty, this is fascinating. After looking at chapter 1, Job does not accuse Satan. He doesn't point fingers or blame there. He says, the Almighty, God is in control of all of this. He's the one who struck me with this arrow or arrows, right? It's him who's brought these trials on me. That is a difficult truth for us, isn't it? When you look at your struggles in life and the pain, and to blame God for those things. And he says, the poison, so apparently we could put some poison on the tip and make it even more painful, has infected my spirit, my very soul, the inside of me, right? And I could see that. I could see that in Dawn's eyes. Just the somebody's been struck with an arrow, right? The poison's infecting his soul, right? It just happens sometimes, right? Sometimes it's worse than others. But to see that in Dawn's eyes, just the frustration. He loves to sing, he loves music, and for him to not be able to put words in there is difficult. And God's terrors are lined up against me. This is tough. Job's different arrows we talked about last week. So we can look at those again. 6 arrows. He lost his oxen and the servants that were watching them. So that's, his tractors, the oxen. So all of his ability to take care of crops is gone because his ox are gone. So your tractors are all broken. Your sheep were the next one, and that's his livestock. So all the cows and anyone who is milking your cows, taking care of the herd, are gone. The camels were the third arrow, or punch, as I talked about last week. So your cars, all of your transportation would be gone. This is likely Arabia, that kind of territory. Camels would have been their source of transportation almost entirely. They're gone, and the people who took care of them. The fourth arrow was kids. They're all gone. All 10 of his children have perished. And then the fifth one was his health. Right? This is getting more and more painful as you go, right? Arrow upon arrow being pounded into his heart. So he's got boils all over him. I talked about the worms infecting those. It was pretty disgusting and awful. People didn't even recognize him. And then the sixth one was his wife giving up hope as well on him and telling him to just curse God and to die. Those are his arrows. That's the pain that he struggled through and suffered. And then we get this devastation. These arrows just kept coming. And it's devastating for us to experience that kind of stuff. So chapter 3, if you've got your Bibles, you could open up to chapter 3. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, unfortunately, so it's a little different than what you've got. But I found that I just liked it lately, so I used that by chance. It's very similar. Chapter 3 of Job, so right before Psalms is Job. And it's just a much smaller book than Psalms, but you should be able to find it. Chapter 3 then, after we've got the two stories we talked about in chapters 1 and 2, and all of those arrows that he experiences, this is where he decides he's going to speak up. This is what's really going on. So verse 1 says, "At last Job spoke, and he cursed the day of his birth." So the first wish that he has with this, his first wish is that he would not have been born at all. Verses 3 through 10. Let the day of my birth be erased, and the night I was conceived. Let it just be gone. He goes on for several verses then about wishing he had never been born. Verse 10 summarizes it well. Curse that day for failing to shut my mother's womb, for letting me be born to see all this trouble. That's getting pretty depressed, wouldn't you say? I wish I had never been born. Curse the day I shouldn't have had to see all this trouble. Number 2 is verses 11 through 16. A wish he had been born dead. Verse 11 says, why wasn't I born dead? Why didn't I die as I came from my mother's womb? Verse 13, had I died at birth, I would now be at peace. I would be asleep and at rest. This is a fascinating verse for him as well. I wish I was, if I was going to be born, then at least I should have been born dead, and I wouldn't have had to suffer all of these trials. I'd be at peace now. I'd be at rest. There's a great hope for us. If you've lost a child, if you've had a miscarriage, there's some real encouragement there, in a sense, of knowing the child is better off maybe than we've been living this life of hardship. It's hard to swallow, but some good news in the midst of his wishes for his own demise. The third wish that we read about is also in chapter 3 here, but chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, he says it real bluntly. Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant my desire. I wish he would crush me. I wish he would reach out his hand and kill me. Do you think these arrows have infected his soul? Just a bit, maybe. Right? Job is just overwhelmed with this grief, with the hardship of life. He wishes he had not been born. He wishes he'd been born dead, and now he just wishes God would kill him and take him out altogether at this point. He is ready to be done with life. In verses 25 and 26 of chapter 3, he summarizes then this. He says, what I always feared has happened to me. What I always feared would happen is the haunting sense that what if my family doesn't come back? Family's been gone on a trip. They drive up to Appleton occasionally. I think, what if they were in a car accident and they didn't come back? Those horrible fears, right? Or you wake up with a nightmare of sorts thinking, what if that would happen? The worst of our dreams. He says, what I dreaded has come true. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest. Only troubles come. Job is absolutely devastated. And so it's easy for us maybe to look at him and go, well, that's kind of an extreme case. My life isn't that bad and that kind of thing. And that's true, certainly, to a degree. But in reality, this is all of us. At some point in our lives, calamity comes and trials just pound down on us. And it may not seem like anything. You're not going to come up to the front of the church and go, my life is so terrible, right? For me, one of the most devastating things was to come to Christ, right? Thinking he's going to put things back together. He's going to fix stuff for me. And all is going to be good from here because I've accepted Christ and God's on my side now, right? So things will be good. And then things still were difficult, right? And for me, it wasn't health. It wasn't huge trials. It was simply that I struggled to pass an ear training class in music. So with studying music in college, I had to be able to pluck out, or for them to pluck a note out and another note and be able to tell them what the interval was and all kinds of things like that, to just hear perfectly what's going on and be able to sing and that kind of thing. It was hard, and I couldn't figure it out. And God didn't just fix it. And it was just more trials. By no means is that what Job dealt with, right? That just doesn't come remotely close. But for my soul, it was an arrow that cut deeply and confused me and really brought trials. So, when we look at this, though, this is what's so wonderful about the book of Job, is it's covered with this sense of hardship and the reality of life. But in the midst of it, there are these gems, these rare stones that are precious and valuable, right? That just stand out because they're in the context of this incredible grief, the trials and the hardship. There's these gems that just shine forth and go, this is truth. This is helpful to us. The first one, I love this. One of the books that I was reading on Job by Henry Garapi, he says this about the verse after he goes through all kinds of the text. It says, the best known and most loved passage of this book, of this verse. That's pretty potent, isn't it? To look at the entire book of Job and to say, this is the best known and the most loved passage of the book. I didn't know that. But it probably is, simply because you've probably all heard it in Handel's Messiah, right? The Messiah, there's the ringing lines that get sung during that, and one of them is from this passage. Verse 25, chapter 19 is where we're at. And the gem is this: but as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives. But as for me, I know my Redeemer lives. So in the midst of this, I want to die. I give up. This is horrible. He writes these words. And this idea here that he's speaking of this Redeemer, this defender or vindicator, is really a very legal term. So it falls in line with some of the other things that he speaks of God in some of the earlier gems, where he talks about God being our advocate, our mediator. So legal ideas of someone who's going to stand beside you for an advocate, a mediator, somebody who's going to come and try to help you work things out. Even the idea of a witness is in there, that he needs God to come be his witness, right? Here he uses Redeemer. The idea that someone is going to come and make it right, not of my own doing, but simply bail me out, in a sense, and get me into a better place. So to redeem, if you've read the book of Ruth and done a study on the book of Ruth, that's probably the biggest, the most famous picture of it, right? Ruth is from Moab, and she was a daughter-in-law to Naomi, and their husbands all died, and so Naomi wants to move back as an Israelite to Bethlehem and to just reestablish things after she and her husband had moved to Moab because of a drought and tough times. So they moved to Moab. The daughter's married. But so then Naomi the son's married. And now you have a daughter-in-law coming back with Naomi, Ruth. But they come back, and their property isn't really theirs anymore. It's been sold because he forfeited it when they left. But now they don't have land. They don't have any defender for them as women, and so they're desperate for some help. And what happens is Boaz comes along, and he redeems them. He He buys them back, makes it right, and takes them in as their defender and their leader, their helper, to walk with them. The same is true throughout Scripture, though. In Exodus, we see this used of God, where God says, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of Egypt, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with a great act of judgment. I will redeem you. I will bring you back. I will reconnect you and put you in a better place. That's what Job is understanding here, this legal idea of being restored. He goes on in this passage, so you can click it again, and he will stand upon the earth at last. So this Redeemer lives, which we have a whole different understanding of that, but we'll get to it. But he will stand upon the earth at last. So in the end, he's going to stand and he's going to rule. And then it says, and after my body has decayed, yet my body in my body I will see God. I will see him for myself. Yes, I will see him with my own eyes. A huge picture of hope here for Job, right? Even when these boils and the skin is just rotted away and I am gone and I am dead, I'm going to see my Redeemer. I'm going to see God for who he really is. I'm going to be with him. He's coming to earth as part of this as we look at the end time kinds of picture here. I'm going to see God. What a great picture for us of hope, of a sense that there's something better to come. Job had this hope that God would accept him in the end. Though at this point, he really looks at God as an enemy. God has not been for him. He's been opposing him. He goes, God knows my life. He knows my faith, and he's going to accept me in spite of this. In spite of his not really understanding resurrection, he seems to give us a pretty good picture of it here. For us, though, to look at this passage, we have very different eyes than Job. Even if we've gone through great trials, we read this and we say, my Redeemer lives, and we think Jesus came to earth and he died on a cross for me and redeemed me before God and accepts me as who I am because he loves me and cares about me, not because of anything I've done. He's redeemed me and he lives. He died on that cross, but he rose from the grave and lives forever and rules. And we look at this with just completely different eyes, knowing Jesus has come to this earth, died on a cross, and now lives. But then we also have this final picture too, as we can look at Revelation and a number of other passages in the New Testament that speak of him coming again and standing on the earth and welcoming us into his presence and taking us to be with him forever. This is a great passage, which Job, I don't think, had a real understanding of what he was writing for us to be able to see and the significance